The change came quietly, the kind that does not ask permission and does not apologize afterward. Anna arrived early as always, before the noise of the palace woke fully, before orders hardened into routine. She went to a whiteboard where assignments were listed and expected to see the usual rotation, the same tasks repeated for years like beads on a rosary. Instead, there was almost nothing written, only one line in elegant handwriting that did not belong to management. Grand Hall, wedding preparation.
If you stand up with the Christian community, subscribe and let me know in the comments from where you are watching.
Immediate. There had always been an unwritten rule that people like her did not cross certain thresholds. Cleaning happened in silence before or after events, never during, never visible. Staff learned the shape of invisibility, the way children learn the alphabet. Today that rule had been erased as easily as chalk with a damp cloth. No announcement followed, no explanation. People moved around her, pretending urgency that allowed them not to speak. The simplest things revealed intention. No one looked surprised. That meant planning. That meant consent. She asked the supervisor only because procedure required it, not because she expected honesty. He confirmed the order without lifting his eyes. He offered no reason and wrapped himself in the safety of silence. She didn't press. She didn't plead. She understood more from what he avoided than from what he said. The handwriting on the board stayed with her. The delicacy of it. The confidence. Layla's hand. Layla, the prince's wife, admired for beauty and style, known in private for precision that made cruelty feel like etiquette. Layla preferred arrangements to confrontations. She did not insult. She curated humiliation. Weeks earlier, Layla had asked Anna whether she prayed, and when Anna answered simply that she was Christian and trusted God, Layla had smiled with polite curiosity that did not reach her eyes. The moment had been brief, but it lingered afterward like a note left unresolved in the air. Now the meaning was clear. The question had been measurement. Anna walked to the supply room. The objects she touched were familiar, but they no longer belonged to habit. They were part of someone else's design. She knew the shape of traps that present themselves as invitations. She had seen many versions of the same performance. The powerful inviting the invisible to appear only to remind them, through laughter or silence, what a boundary truly was. Later, on her break, the official invitation arrived. Expensive cardstock, gold letters announcing a royal wedding at the Grand Palace of the Dunes. To outsiders, it was honor. To those who knew the interior rhythm of the palace, it was a stage cue. She was being called to attend not as a guest in earnest, but as an exhibit. Anna did not crumple the envelope. She placed it on the table and looked at it carefully, not as an object of glamour, but as evidence. It told her what Layla wanted, a cleaner standing among royalty in plain clothes. Swallowed by luxury she did not belong to, made grateful in advance for being allowed near it. There would be smiles and small looks and the quiet joy of those who enjoy testing the strength of another person's dignity. Years ago, such a plan might have destroyed her. Not now. She went home early with permission and sat in her small apartment, where there was almost nothing to distract her. The crucifix on the wall was simple wood, unornamented, unchanged by fashion. She prayed without asking for protection or revenge. She did not bargain. Prayer for her was not performance. It was alignment. Things inside her settled into order when placed before God. What she remembered most clearly in prayer was not pain, but identity. Before this job, before the losses that had narrowed her life to wages and rent, she had founded a Christian organization. It had begun without funding, without publicity, only with the conviction that abandoned people should not be left alone to carry burdens that could be shared. She remembered long meetings, tired laughter, mistakes repaired by patience. She remembered families looking at her not as a servant, but as a partner in survival. She did not need anyone else to validate that history. It existed because it had changed real lives. Her circumstances had collapsed later. Illnesses, debts, paperwork that piled fast in solutions. But collapse does not rewrite the past. Work changed. Work did not. She said very quietly, not to convince herself, but to acknowledge what had already formed. She would attend the wedding, not as decoration for someone else's mockery, not as spectacle, not as instrument of revenge, simply as herself, refusing to lie that dignity is assigned by rank. To do this with clarity, she needed help with one practical thing: clothing that did not apologize and did not boast. She called Janet, the friend she had almost lost to time, but not to affection. The voice on the other end carried recognition, not curiosity. When Anna explained the situation, she did not add drama. She described facts: Layla's gesture, the invitation, the intention behind it, and then the decision. She would not hide. She would not fight. She would stand. Janet understood immediately and worked without unnecessary sentiment. She did not talk about fairy tales or transformation. She listened to Anna's purpose and matched fabric to it. The goal was not to make Anna look wealthy or extraordinary. The goal was to remove distractions so that people saw the person rather than the costume. The simplicity of the result was its strength. Nothing shiny, nothing weak. Something that said, "I know who I am and I do not need your approval to remain whole." When Anna tried the clothes, what changed was not her reflection but her posture. Years of bending to avoid attention loosened. She didn't become someone else. She stopped disguising who she already was. She thanked Janet and left without ceremony. Friendship did not require flourishes. The day of the wedding unfolded with the mechanical precision of large events. The palace buzzed with restrained urgency. People whispered because whispering creates intimacy around cruelty. Anna heard her name in corners but did not chase it. She arrived at the time written on the invitation. Not early to appear eager, not late to appear defiant. She walked through the entrance not like royalty and not like staff, simply upright. She did not scan for reactions, yet she felt the weight of them. Conversation softened, then paused, not because her presence was ridiculous, but because it refused a predicted script. She was not nervous, not awed, not apologizing for existing in that space. She was composed in the exact way that unsettles people who rely on hierarchy to organize their world. Those who knew her as the cleaner struggled to reconcile that label with the woman in front of them. Those who had never noticed her understood without translation that something had been misjudged. She did not search for Layla, but she sensed a shift in the room when Layla finally saw her. There is a silence that follows when a plan meets a reality it did not anticipate. It does not explode. It sinks. That silence moved through the hall like a current. Anna stood without theatrics, present but not demanding attention. In the stillness of her own heart, she repeated something she had known long before that day. Dignity does not beg and it does not attack. It stands. This was not her humiliation. It was the moment others discovered she had never agreed to play the part they had written for her. Eyes followed her not because she was loud, but because she refused to shrink. The absence of fear unsettled people accustomed to obedience wrapped in smiles. The staff at the edges of the hall recognized her first. They exchanged short glances that carried long messages. She came. Some felt secondhand anxiety, expecting the reaction of those above them. Some felt something else they did not yet name, relief that someone dared to exist without apology. Anna did not look for anyone to approve of her. She did not cling to any group. She simply chose a place where guests gathered before the ceremony and stood with the composure of someone waiting for a bus, someone grounded in ordinary courage. She held her bag in her hands. No trembling, no self-minimization. She did not pretend to belong. She refused to pretend not to. A few guests approached with curiosity disguised as politeness, asking who she was, asking what family she represented. She answered without embroidery. She said her name, nothing more, and did not fill the silence with explanation. People waited for her to justify standing among them. When that justification did not come, some felt confused, others irritated. They were enused to a person who neither boasted nor apologized. Layla's entrance was not announced, but everyone perceived it. Power has a way of pulling attention without effort. She walked slowly, surrounded by people who orbit prestige the way moths orbit light. Then her gaze found Anna. For a moment, her expression did not change. The discipline of public composure was strong. Yet behind the controlled face, there was a quick calculation. The plan had been simple. Invite a cleaner without resources. Enjoy the comedy of contrast. Reinforce hierarchy in the language of generosity. What stood before her now was not the caricature. she had prepared for. It was a woman who refused to collapse on command. Layla did not approach immediately. She remained where she was, talking to guests while her mind rewrote its script. She had imagined surprise, embarrassment, nervousness. She had anticipated gratitude expressed too quickly and too openly. Instead, she saw serenity as resistance, a person anchored in something not available for purchase. Anna did not initiate approach either. She did not chase confrontation. She did not perform defiance. The confrontation already existed by the simple fact of her presence. No raised voice was needed. The strongest conflict arose without a step being taken. Old memories surfaced not like nostalgia, but like evidence. She remembered visiting families during the years of her organization, homes where furniture was broken but pride remained intact, where parents had little to give but still insisted on offering tea, because generosity was not about wealth. It was about refusing to be reduced to need. Dignity is stubborn. It survives even when the world decides it should not. That same stubbornness stood with her now. A counselor of the royal household walked past, saw her, stopped abruptly, and looked again as recognition connected past and present. He had once attended meetings organized by her Christian group in the city, back when no titles were in the room, only problems and solutions. He remembered her not as staff, but as leader. He took a breath, as if realizing an error that had existed for years without being named. He whispered to the person beside him, and whisper spread. The narrative in the hall shifted quietly, one person at a time. Layla noticed the whispering. She sensed control loosening without any visible action. Control for her was not about love or relationship. It was about choreography. People moving where she expected them to move, reacting according to her invisible cues. Anna's decision to stand without shame broke that choreography more effectively than rebellion ever could. At last Layla approached. She did so with elegance, with the grace trained for cameras and diplomacy. She smiled for observers and kept her tone light, but everything beneath it was tension. "You came," she said, as if stating a neutral fact. "I was invited." Anna answered, not confrontational, not submissive, simply true. Layla looked at her clothing, searching for a weakness that would support the original intention. She found none. There was nothing extravagant to accuse pretension and nothing shabby to mock. There was only simplicity that did not collapse. Layla felt something she didn't expect to feel in her own wedding celebration: unease. She did not prolong the exchange. She could not afford to. Prolonged conversation risked revealing more than she wished others to see. She moved away with dignified speed, yet every step after that was heavier. The ceremony progressed with formal beauty, with speeches designed to sound eternal, with vows that echoed through microphones. People cried where social script instructed them to cry. Anna listened quietly. She did not measure the religion of others. She did not enter arguments of belief. Her Christianity did not require superiority. It required integrity. She prayed silently for the couple, not because they deserved kindness, not because they did not, but because prayer was not a transaction for her. It was expression of who she was before God, independent of how she had been treated. She did not romanticize suffering. She did not turn herself into a saint in her imagination. She was a person with a job, with bills, with a past full of both strength and wreckage. She was a person who had been mocked indirectly and had refused to bow to it. Nothing more mythical than that. The realism of it made it stronger. During the reception, conversations turned again toward her presence. Some admired her calm without understanding it. Some tried to reframe the event in their favor, claiming that the invitation had been generous in spirit. Others avoided her entirely because she revealed something uncomfortable. Status collapses in the presence of someone who no longer fears losing it. One guest approached her not with curiosity, but with respect, quiet and practical. He simply said, "I know your work," and left it at that. No grand statements. No drama. It was enough. That brief acknowledgement restored proportion inside the room. The prince himself realized the full situation gradually. He had not planned the invitation. Layla had arranged it under the language of kindness. When he understood the motive behind it, he did not create a scene. He changed attitude. His conversation with Layla grew colder, not visibly, not in public argument, but in the small withdrawal that says more than shouting ever could. Layla felt it. She knew the cause. She recognized that the humiliation she intended had curved back toward her reputation, not by attack, but by contrast. Anna did not need to expose anyone. Truth had exposed itself. Humiliation works like smoke. Once released, it stains everyone who touched it. After the final formalities, Anna left the hall with the same measured steps with which she had entered. Nothing grand. No symbolic gesture. Outside, air felt different simply because noise was behind her. She did not weep. She did not tremble with triumph. She simply breathed as someone who had carried her own weight and set it down intact. She did not seek revenge and did not receive applause. She did not become famous. She reclaimed something quieter and far more enduring, the authority over her own name. Layla remained inside the palace, surrounded by luxury that could not cover the fact that superiority had cracked. Anna walked into the ordinary evening with steadiness, and that steadiness was her victory. She knew this moment was not an ending of humiliation forever. Life does not close chapters theatrically, but something had shifted. A line had been drawn and would not be erased as easily as chalk. She returned home to the same small apartment. The crucifix was still there. The furniture had not multiplied. Her circumstances had not changed. Yet the room felt different because she herself stood differently inside it. She did not wait for miracles of spectacle. She thought in terms of work, as she always had. She understood that what needed rebuilding was not image, not status, but mission. She sat at the table with paper and pen, not because she was nostalgic, but because plans become concrete when written. She began listing names from memory. People she had helped years before, colleagues in churches, community workers who never appear in headlines but hold cities together quietly. She did not know yet what form her work would take, only that she would not live the rest of her life as if the losses had rewritten God's call permanently. Her strength did not announce itself with noise. It revealed itself in persistence. Tomorrow she would still wake early. She would still work. But she would not allow herself again to be reduced to a role designed by someone else's contempt. Servanthood in cleaning was honorable. Servitude to humiliation was not. Across the city, the wedding celebration continued with music and lights. Inside the palace, Layla smiled for photographs because public life requires continuity, regardless of inner fracture. But beneath the smile was a new feeling, unfamiliar and unwelcome. The awareness that cruelty does not always produce submission, that some people remain unbroken simply because they know the source of their dignity does not sit on any throne made by human hands. Anna turned off the light and rested. She did not rehearse speeches she had never said. She did not imagine alternate versions of confrontation. She trusted that what had happened was enough. Not spectacular, not cinematic. Real. Tomorrow would not bring applause. It would bring work. And she would step into it with the same quiet certainty she had carried into the wedding hall, the certainty that honor does not come from invitation, and dignity does not come from permission, and identity rooted in faith does not need anyone else to validate its existence. This was her beginning again. Morning did not ask for permission to arrive. It came with the same routine sounds she had known for years. Pipes in the wall, the neighbor locking the door twice, a bus braking at the end of the street. Her life looked exactly the same from the outside. The change existed only in the way she met it. She prepared coffee without ceremony. She did not replay the wedding. She did not feed on memory as entertainment. What had needed to be faced had been faced. Now came the quieter work that always follows decisive moments, rebuilding without applause. The palace resumed its rhythm. No one mentioned the wedding to her directly. Silence became the chosen language, not because nothing had happened, but because too much had. Silence is a shield, and many people needed shield that week. Still, she noticed small gestures that did not exist before. Some staff greeted her with eyes instead of looking through her. The supervisor spoke her name instead of avoiding it. These were not grand conversions of heart. They were corrections of posture. Enough. Layla did not cross her path. That absence was intentional. It had weight. In palaces, avoidance is sometimes louder than confrontation. Anna did not seek her either. She did not chase apology. She had no interest in forcing a scene that would only create more humiliation in another direction. Justice is not revenge reversed. It is steadiness. What demanded her attention now was not the palace, but the unfinished story of her own calling. The sense that what she once started had not been destroyed, only interrupted. She began after work each evening to review old documents she had kept folded between pages of books, bylaws of the organization she founded, contacts written in different inks from different years, minutes from meetings where they once argued about how to stretch too little money across too much need. There was no nostalgia in handling these papers. There was accountability. The work had mattered. That made its interruption matter too. She contacted a small group from those days, not all at once, not with dramatic announcements, just one person after another. Some phone numbers were dead ends. Some voices answered with surprise, followed by warmth that traveled across distance quickly. They asked if she was back. She refused the language of grand return. She said only that she felt able again to do what she had never stopped believing in. Simple service rooted in Christian faith without sponsorship from prestige. Meetings began in modest spaces, a church basement, a borrowed classroom after hours, sometimes a kitchen table. There were no banners, no slogans, just conversations shaped by practical questions. Who is falling through cracks? What has changed in the city? Where are families being forgotten because they are not politically useful? She took notes. She listened more than she spoke, because listening is a form of respect stronger than promise. Her faith did not make her naive about systems. She understood bureaucracy, funding, legal requirements. She also understood that charity without structure collapses into sentiment. She registered paperwork again piece by piece, filling lines on forms, standing in government offices where waiting becomes its own discipline. None of it felt beneath her. Paperwork is simply another past service, must walk. One afternoon, while she waited for a document stamp, she noticed a woman across the room filling a form with shaking hands, stopping often as if trying to remember basic information. Anna did not intrude. She waited until their paths crossed naturally at the copy machine. She offered help in ordinary language, not in the tone of someone rescuing the weak, but of one neighbor assisting another. The woman accepted. That pattern repeated in different places with different people. Service re-entered her life not as project, but as habit. News of her efforts spread in the way important news usually spreads, not through media, but through people who've been helped and tell others in kitchens and bus stops. Volunteers gathered again, not many, just enough. They did not come because of publicity. They came because she had once stood with them in hard seasons, and they trusted that she would again. Meanwhile, the palace remained present in her life as employment. She did not romanticize leaving work for a higher mission. Work fed her. It anchored her in the same reality as those she served. Faith for her did not mean escape from labor. It meant how to carry it. Layla finally chose to meet her again, not out of reconciliation, but because continued avoidance had begun to speak too loudly inside her own mind. Layla was not used to being wrong without remedy. Control for her had always included the right to redefine events afterward. This time definition had escaped her. She encountered Anna in one of the smaller corridors where sound does not echo. Layla spoke first, not in the language of apology, but in the careful neutrality of someone testing ground. "The wedding went well," she said, almost as if asking permission from the air to believe it. "Yes," Anna replied simply. Layla waited for more, for commentary, accusation, gratitude, anything that would restore her as the center of the narrative. None came. The silence that followed did not punish. It simply refused to decorate the truth. Layla's composure tightened. She wanted to explain, to recast the invitation as inclusion, to soften her intent into misunderstanding. But she also knew that Anna had seen through the veneer already. Attempts to rewrite motives would only diminish her further. She chose instead to say nothing more and walked away with posture intact but certainly fractured. That fracture mattered more than any confrontation could have. Weeks passed. The new old organization began operating quietly again. Emergency food distributions, accompaniment of elderly people who become isolated, tutoring sessions for children slipping behind in school. Churches across denominational lines cooperated without argument because practical need is a language wider than theology. Anna insisted on one core principle: help without humiliation. No stage. No photographs taken for donors. No requirement for people to perform gratitude. Her Christian faith shaped this insistence. For her, the point of service was not to display virtue, but to recognize that each person already carried dignity given by God, independent of their condition. That belief had sustained her through her own years of reduction to cleaning lady, and she would not reproduce the same injury in others under the disguise of charity. Sometimes she returned home exhausted, body heavy, mind still counting tasks. Exhaustion did not discourage her. It confirmed direction. Mission without fatigue is usually fantasy. There were setbacks too. Grant applications rejected. Landlords unwilling to rent affordable space for activities. Volunteers who vanished without notice when work proved less glamorous than imagined. She absorbed each disappointment not as failure of calling, but as the ordinary resistance reality offers to anything worth doing. The counselor who had recognized her at the wedding came to one of their meetings discreetly one evening. He brought no ceremony with him, only contacts and knowledge of municipal resources. Influence used quietly can heal some of the damage influence used cruelly creates. He did not erase what had happened at the palace, but he chose to stand beside the work she led now. That was repentance in action, even if the word repentance was never spoken. Anna did not build her life around Layla, the palace, or the memory of humiliation. She refused to make bitterness her organizing principle. She did not deny what had happened. She simply refused to live orbiting it. Identity built around injury remains tied to the injurer. She chose instead to anchor identity where it had been anchored before everything fell apart. In God and service. In truth lived quietly and stubbornly. One evening after a long meeting, she stayed alone in the church hall finishing notes. The building was almost dark. She placed her pen down and felt the stillness settle around her. She understood in that moment that what had begun again was not about regaining status or correcting other people's perceptions. It was about fidelity to the call she had once heard and had not imagined. Her life remained modest. Her job remained humble. Her mission regained direction. Those three truths coexisted without contradiction. Outside, the city moved as it always had, unaware of what had shifted in quiet rooms. That did not matter. Real change rarely announces itself. It roots itself in ordinary days and grows without spectacle. Anna locked the door, stepped into the night air, and walked home steady, not triumphant. Her faith did not promise her ease. It promised her meaning. That was enough. The first public test of the renewed work came sooner than she expected. A local factory closed without warning, leaving families with severance promises that dissolved into legal language and delays. The news did not reach newspapers with headlines. It arrived through sighs in waiting rooms, through children mentioning that parents were home a lot now, through church prayer requests whispered rather than spoken aloud. Anna listened carefully and did not dramatize the situation. She recognized a pattern. Sudden unemployment, then unpaid bills, then fear, then shame, then isolation. Poverty rarely begins with hunger. It begins with withdrawal. People disappear from gatherings because they cannot afford to pretend everything is normal. She called a meeting with her team. They sat around old tables with pens that sometimes failed and with determination that didn't. She outlined what she knew, which was not yet enough. She resisted the temptation to promise what they could not deliver. Realism is a form of respect. Then she asked a single question. Where do we begin? They began with listening sessions. No speeches. No instructions. People came reluctantly at first, then more openly, because being heard without being graded is rare. Anna did not position herself as savior. She sat among them and asked concrete questions. Rent, medication, school transport, groceries, and wrote things down. Needs become less overwhelming when they are named with precision. Some in authority dismiss her effort as small scale, as if smallness were failure. She felt no compulsion to argue. She had learned that impact is not measured by the size of the room in which a decision is announced, but by the number of lives that stop falling because someone finally built a railing. Parallel to all this, she continued cleaning at the palace. moving along the same corridors as before. Work did not feel smaller now. It felt integrated, part of the whole of her life rather than its definition. She wore the uniform without discomfort. Identity had shifted inward permanently. Occasionally, she saw Layla at a distance. Their eyes met once briefly, and in that second there was no war, only an uncomfortable awareness on Layla's side that certain kinds of power do not translate into control over another person's conscience. Layla turned away first, not dramatically, simply unable to sustain a look that reflected her own miscalculation. The prince treated Anna with quiet respect from then on, not with exaggerated kindness, not with public acknowledgments, but with the basic decency of someone who understood a wrong had been done in his house, even if he had not fully orchestrated it. His change was measured not in words, but in the way staff were spoken to in his presence. One person's humiliation had exposed a larger pattern, and he had chosen, in part, to break it. The organization's work expanded into education support. Children from factory families were falling behind because chaos at home tends to follow children into classrooms. Anna coordinated volunteers to tutor after school. There was nothing cinematic about it, just repetition, reading exercises, math explained again until the concept landed, adults showing up consistently enough that children dared to rely on them. She insisted that volunteers never use help as leverage to impose belief. Christian faith motivated the service, but coercion contradicted the very heart of that faith. She prayed for the children silently as she tidied the room afterward. Some were Christians, some were not. All were people entrusted to her attention for a time. That was enough. Resistance arrived too, as it always does. A local official hinted that permits might take longer if Anna's group did not partner with a businessman seeking publicity. The offer was polite corruption, cooperation in exchange for visibility. She refused without raising her voice. She simply repeated that help should not become advertisement. The official delayed the paperwork in petty retaliation. She waited, steady. Waiting can be a form of strength when you refuse to sell your purpose to impatience. Janet remained close, not only as a friend who prepared her clothes for the wedding, but as someone who now invested more deeply in the work itself. She used her network to collect school uniforms, professional attire for job interviews, clothing repaired instead of discarded. She worked late in silence, needle moving through fabric as if mending lives by implication. Neither of them romanticized what they were doing. They simply refused to stop. One evening, after a day crowded with small crises, Anna sat in the empty tutoring room. Chairs scattered, chalk dust visible on her hands. She felt tired, the real, honest fatigue that sinks into bones. But inside the tiredness was peace, the kind that does not come from success numbers or from praise, but from coherence between belief and action. She thought briefly about the wedding again, not to relive it, but to recognize how God sometimes allows humiliation to become revelation. Without that invitation meant to wound, she might have continued shrinking inside herself, convinced her time had passed. Instead, insult had thrown light on something that had only been dormant. She did not thank cruelty. She thanked God for turning something small and mean into the beginning of something necessary. A message arrived on her phone from one of the factory workers. It was simple. "We didn't get the eviction notice this month. Thank you." She did not answer with a speech. She wrote back, "We stand with you." It was not charity language. It was family language. Her life formed a new rhythm. Palace work at dawn, organizational work after. Prayer woven through both like thread, invisible but essential. She did not compartmentalize faith into Sundays. It guided tone, decisions, boundaries. She refused to cut ethical corners, even when it slowed progress. She refused to use guilt as motivation, even when it seemed efficient. The city slowly began to recognize her not as the cleaning lady who surprised everyone at the wedding, but as something truer, a constant presence. Constancy is not glamorous, but outlasts spectacle. Layla heard about Anna's growing work indirectly. Reports reached her through staff and acquaintances. Outwardly, she remained composed, but inwardly the knowledge unsettled her. She had set out to reduce Anna to an object of ridicule. Instead, Anna had risen without attacking her, without accusing, simply by standing in the light of who she already was. That kind of response is disarming because it leaves no enemy to fight, only conscience to face. One afternoon, Layla considered sending for Anna, summoning her under some pretext, perhaps to offer support to the organization and reframe herself as patron rather than antagonist. But she stopped. She understood, at least dimly, that true reconciliation would require something she had not yet learned how to give, a direct acknowledgement of wrongdoing without controlling the outcome. Anna did not wait for that acknowledgement. She did not center her life around receiving it. Forgiveness for her was not denial of injury or invitation to repeat it. It was release. She refused to rent permanent space in her heart to resentment. There was too much work to do. As months passed, the organization stabilized. Bank accounts balanced with effort. Food programs rotated with dignity. People who had once felt disposable now participated as volunteers themselves. The best sign of success was not gratitude expressed toward Anna, but responsibility assumed by those who had been helped. Late one night, she unlocked her apartment and sat for a while without turning on the light. The quiet felt full, not empty. She realized then that she had stopped feeling like a guest in her own life. What she believed and what she did now matched again. Tomorrow would bring the same things: work, need, complications, but none of them frightened her anymore. Her dignity was no longer fragile. It no longer depended on invitations or exclusions. It rested where it had always belonged, in God's hands, beyond the reach of palace games. That knowledge did not make her proud. It made her free. The organization's new rhythm eventually drew attention beyond the circles of those directly involved. Attention did not come as applause. It came as pressure. A well-known foundation contacted Anna. They did not visit the neighborhoods or sit in listening sessions. They sent emails written in polished language about impact scaling and strategic visibility. Then they asked for a meeting. She agreed because refusal without hearing can become its own kind of arrogance. She met them in a glass office far from the places she usually worked, a location chosen to remind visitors who held resources. They spoke with smiles and certainty. They described how funding could elevate the brand of her organization. They proposed public campaigns, photo opportunities, interviews featuring her story as inspiration. They suggested adjustments: less explicit Christian language in documents, fewer references to prayer, more inclusive messaging for donors uncomfortable with faith. They framed these conditions as practical, not ideological, just small steps toward broader support. They expected gratitude. They expected relief. They expected agreement. Anna listened without interrupting. Silence unsettled them more than argument would have. When they finished, she thanked them for the clarity of their offer. She said she would not accept funding tied to the removal of the Christian identity that had created the work in the first place. She said that if the choice was between being smaller and being hollow, she would choose smaller. Her tone was calm, not dramatic. Calm made the refusal heavier. The meeting ended politely. Their faces remained professional. The message afterward was not. Funding lines quietly closed. Bureaucratic obstacles appeared where previously there had been none. Partnership invitations evaporated. Influence had been offended, and influence pressed back. This was the kind of resistance Anna had expected since she restarted the mission. Not cruelty in palaces now. Systems. Emails unanswered. Permits delayed. Budget strained on purpose. Fatigue returned more sharply. She spent evenings calculating again, cutting expenses, asking volunteers to stretch further. There were nights when she placed her head on the table for a moment longer than necessary after finishing paperwork. Faith does not remove exhaustion. It simply prevents exhaustion from becoming the final word. The pressure revealed fault lines inside the team, too. A few volunteers argued that she should compromise publicly while keeping faith privately. They said donors did not need to know everything. They spoke of practicality, growth, opportunity. She did not accuse them. She understood temptation by experience. But she would not negotiate her center away in small increments. She explained only once that the work flowed from who they were before God, not from what donors wanted to hear. They could disagree. They could leave. A few did. Their departure hurt. But false unity would have hurt more later. Meanwhile, at the palace, a different test formed. The administration changed cleaning schedules and roles after an external audit. New policies reduced breaks, extended hours, and increased surveillance under the language of efficiency. Staff whispered about losing days off and about contracts quietly rewritten with unfavorable clauses. Anna read the new document carefully. Details matter more than tone. Hidden in dense paragraphs was a clause that removed a key protection for longtime workers, the right to contest unfair dismissal. This was the same pattern she had seen outside the palace walls. Compression disguised as modernization. She understood exactly what it would do to people who had no safety net. Make them obedient through fear. Some urged her to stay quiet. She was rebuilding her life. She had other priorities now. She could not risk losing this job too. But conscience is consistent, or it isn't conscience at all. She did not make speeches in hallways. She requested a formal meeting with management. No drama, just procedure. Sitting across from administrators, she spoke without ornament. The clause was harmful, unnecessary, and unjust. She did not threaten, did not accuse. She simply stated that changing the rules in a way that increased vulnerability for the lowest-paid workers violated any claim the palace had to honor. They dismissed her concerns at first with technical language. Policy, international standards, efficiency frameworks. She repeated patiently that no framework justified weakening those already dependent on the job for survival. She asked that the clause be removed. They smiled. The professional smile that signals dismissal without confrontation. A week later, 2 staff members were restructured out. Quietly. No cause given. That was the line. Anna documented the entire process carefully. She consulted a legal aid clinic that had once supported her organization's early work. She did not launch a crusade. She filed a complaint grounded in labor law. She attached copies, signatures, timelines. She did not rely on outrage. She relied on statute. Management underestimated her. They mistook her gentleness for naivety and her faith for passivity. They had not yet learned that dignity grounded in God is not fragile. It is disciplined. Investigation followed. Slowly, bureaucratically. The kind of process designed to discourage persistence. She persisted. When interviewed, she spoke with precision. When asked why she involved herself, she did not cite revenge. She said simply that injustice tolerated becomes normal, and normal injustice destroys souls. The authority ruling finally arrived in written form. The restructuring had violated procedure. The clause removal had breached contract conditions. The dismissed workers would be reinstated with back pay. The palace administration was fined. No spectacle accompanied the decision. No cameras. Just signatures carrying consequences. Word spread among staff in short messages and restrained smiles. People did not cheer out loud because fear leaves residue, but relief changed how they walked. The reinstated workers returned not as heroes, but as employees whose rights had been defended. Anna did not stand on a chair and claim victory. She went back to work. She cleaned the same floors. She greeted the same people. Her authority did not come from title, but from integrity consistently applied. Layla learned of the ruling in private. The embarrassment cut deeper than any public scene would have. The palace had been judged, not by rumor but by law. She understood now that Anna's strength was not social climbing or loud opposition. It was order, moral and legal, lived without compromise. Layla felt the first honest desire to speak with her, not a control narrative, but to admit wrongdoing. She did not act on it yet. Pride is slow to move. That evening Anna returned home late, body aching, mind still alert. She looked at the crucifix again, not as decoration, not as superstition, but as a reminder. Authority expresses service. Truth lived without spectacle, obedience to God above convenience. She sat down and allowed herself to feel the entire weight of the day. She did not pretend strength. She whispered a short prayer, asking not for triumphs, only for steadiness. Outside, the city kept moving with its usual indifference. Inside one small apartment, a woman without rank or wealth had refused humiliation, rebuilt mission, and defended the vulnerable using the quiet tools of law and faith. No headlines marked it, but families slept without fear of sudden dismissal. Children continued tutoring without interruption. Workers returned to jobs they depended on. This, she thought, is what victory actually looks like in real life. Not applause, not drama, just people able to stand upright again. She turned off the light. Tomorrow would be ordinary, and ordinary was enough for God to work with. The seasons shifted almost imperceptibly, not in weather, but in how people addressed her. They no longer spoke to her as an exception, the cleaner who surprised the palace, but as someone whose presence signaled that things would be handled carefully. Trust arrived without ceremony. It looked like people knocking on the office door of her small organization and sitting down heavily before speaking, because they no longer needed pretend. One afternoon, a school principal called. His voice was composed but pressed in by worry. Attendance had dropped among a group of girls from one particular neighborhood. Grades had fallen sharply. Discipline notes had increased. He had tried meetings, letters, formal channels. Nothing moved. He had heard of Anna not through newspapers, but through parents who said quietly, "She listens." He asked if she would come. She went without announcement. The school was like many others, hallways lined with noise contained by rules. Teachers carrying the fatigue of carrying more than their schedule allowed. The girls in question sat together at the back of the classroom, neither rebellious nor timid, simply absent while present. Their eyes performed attention. Their shoulders held resignation. Anna recognized the posture. It belonged to people already convinced that nothing would change. She did not confront them publicly. She asked for a small meeting after classes. They came because adults had told them to, but they entered with the stance of those prepared not to be affected. Anna did not begin with speeches about future or responsibility. She asked a single question: what happened first? It was the right question. When people fail, something always happened first. Words came slowly, unevenly, then more steadily. Their fathers were unemployed. Their mothers worked extra hours. Responsibilities at home had multiplied. Siblings to watch, errands to run, lines to wait in. Homework fell away, not from laziness, but from prioritizing survival. Shame filled the remaining space. Rather than ask for help, they withdrew. Withdrawal had been misread as indifference. Anna did not offer quick comfort. She named the reality aloud in plain terms, so that its weight moved from their shoulders into the open air. Then she connected threads. Teachers would be informed not as accusers, but as allies. Schedules would be adjusted where possible. Tutors would focus on essentials. Food support would stabilize households, so that girls could be students again, not emergency managers of their own families. The girls did not cry. They did not hug her. They simply looked different at the end of the meeting, like people who finally saw a door that had been invisible before. Sometimes hope is not an emotion. It is a plan. Meanwhile, pressure around Anna increased in quieter, more complicated ways. People began trying to position her. Some wanted to claim her as symbol for their causes. Others attempted to recruit her into political structures. They spoke the language of platforms and reach. They said she owed it to her impact. They disguised ambition as advice. She declined without hostility. She explained nothing beyond the fact that her calling was not to climb, but to remain grounded. Remaining grounded is a form of resistance in a world that measures worth by height. Her refusal confused some and angered others. A commentator wrote a small article describing her as unambitious, another as limited by faith commitments. She did not answer. Public argument would only feed the need for spectacle that she had already rejected. Her answer was continuity, showing up again and again to work that did not photograph well. Layla followed these developments at a distance. The more she watched, the less she recognized herself in contrast. She had lived for years inside approval from above and admiration from afar. Anna seemed to live without either, and yet her life was full of meaning Layla could feel, but not yet touch. Envy entered first, then discomfort, then a kind of painful admiration that forced honesty into places where it had never lived. One evening, Layla asked the prince a question she had avoided even forming before. "Do you think I was wrong?" He did not seize the moment to wound. He spoke gently, which made the truth heavier. "Yes," he said, "not because she surprised us, because we forgot that people do not exist to decorate our events." The sentence did not accuse. It revealed. Layla felt it settle inside her. There was no defense that did not sound small. Silence became her acceptance. Days later, she went to find Anna, not at the palace, where the walls themselves seemed to tilt every conversation toward performance, but at the community center where Anna's organization met. She entered without entourage, a decision that cost her more than she had expected. Status becomes clothing one forgets one is wearing until it is removed. Anna was stacking boxes of supplies. She looked up and saw Layla, then returned to finishing the task before approaching. That small act, refusing to treat the arrival as interruption or as royal visitation, placed him in the only terrain where truth could be spoken, level ground. Layla did not know how to begin. Apology had never been part of her vocabulary in any deep way. She chose the most difficult path precisely because it was the only honest one. "I invited you to my wedding to diminish you," she said without decoration. "You did not allow it. You revealed me instead. I am ashamed." The words did not echo, they settled. Anna did not rush to soften them or say it's nothing. It had not been nothing. Dignity responds best to dignity. She nodded, accepting the confession as real. "I forgive you," she said simply, not as performance, not as superiority, but as decision made long before this meeting, now spoken aloud. "And I do not need you to carry me anywhere to justify it. Just walk differently from now on." Layla's eyes did not fill dramatically. She simply exhaled like someone releasing a long-held tension. She looked around, at mismatched chairs, at posters made by hand, at shelves that leaned slightly, and for the first time felt the stability that can exist inside modest spaces where truth is not curated. "I want to help," Layla said then, cautious, not presuming acceptance, not as correction of reputation, as participation. "Tell me where to start." Anna believed in repentance not as emotion, but as reorientation. She did not hand Layla a microphone. She handed her a list of deliveries scheduled for the afternoon. They carried boxes together. No one there bowed. No one staged photographs. Work leveled the distance between them faster than conversation ever could. That evening, as Anna relocked the center after everyone had left, she paused and understood something new. Restoration is not the erasure of harm, but the transformation of direction after harm is acknowledged. Her life had turned more than once, downward through loss, upward through quiet courage, outward through service. Now another turn appeared. The possibility that those who had once humiliated others could learn a different way of standing in the world. She did not frame it as victory. She did not frame it as story at all. It was simply life continuing, ordered by faith, shaped by choices made daily without witness. She walked home under an ordinary sky, thinking about nothing grand, only tomorrow's schedule and the people who would arrive needing groceries, advice, silence, or prayer. She was ready to offer all four in whatever measure was required. No palace, no foundation, no headline defined her. God did, and in that fact, unadorned and steady, her story kept moving forward. The next months were measured not in events, but in continuity. Continuity is harder than crisis. Anyone can rise once. Few keep showing up when there is no audience. Anna's days formed a pattern made of small faithfulness. Morning shifts at the palace. Afternoons at the center. Evenings planning, calling, listening. She stopped thinking of her life as divided between work and mission. It had become one piece. Wherever she stood, she served. Layla kept coming back, quietly, not often, not dramatically. She helped stack shelves, registered new families, sat with women who spoke more freely to her when she was not dressed in formal layers of status. She did not talk much about the palace. She listened more than she was used to listening. Repentance had moved from words into posture. Some women at the center recognized her from the wedding pictures in magazines. They stared at first, unsure how to behave. Layla solved that uncertainty without speeches. She took a broom, swept the floor, and asked where the mop bucket was kept. Status melted in the presence of ordinary labor. Respect replaced it, the kind that comes from watching someone choose humility rather than being humiliated into it. The center grew busier. Growth did not feel like triumph. It felt like proof that need was larger than resources. Lines stretched some days. Voices rose. not in anger at Anna, but in the frustration of people who had been waiting for too many things in life. She never took their sharpness personally. Desperation has its own vocabulary. She answered it with order, names written down, items distributed fairly, complaints heard without being indulged. One late afternoon, an argument escalated between two men at the entrance, one accusing the other of cutting a line, the other accusing the first of disrespect. The air thickened fast in the way that precedes violence. Anna stepped between them not with sighs, but with certainty. She spoke in an even voice. She did not shout. She did not side with either. She made the rules clear and kept her eyes on theirs until the heat drained out of the moment. Conflict dissolved not because she was feared, but because she would not be moved. Authority grounded in consistency disarms. Afterward, when calm returned, she sat alone for a moment on a plastic chair. Her hands trembled slightly. Courage often appears still from the outside and shakes in private. She acknowledged the trembling for what it was, a sign she was not numb, and kept going. The prince visited the center once, unannounced, without press. He stood in the doorway for a time before entering, simply watching the ordinary work happening inside. Anna spoke with him briefly. There was mutual recognition, without ceremony. He thanked her not for making him look good, but for doing what his own institutions often failed to do. She did not flatter him. She just said, "Use your influence to protect the people no one sees." He nodded. Whether he would or not, she did not know. Her responsibility ended at telling the truth. The palace remained her workplace. Floors still needed scrubbing. Silver still needed polishing. Status did not erase dust. She worked without resentment and without pride. When co-workers spoke to her about fear of job cuts or changes, she did not promise rescue, but she explained calmly what rights they had and how to document things. Knowledge moved like light under a door. People stood a little straighter. At night, when she prayed, she did not ask for easier days. She asked to remain clear. Clarity was the gift she valued most now, the ability to see what mattered and what did not, to distinguish between insult worth ignoring and injustice worth confronting, between noise and calling. One evening, an older man arrived at the center just as they were closing. He was neatly dressed in clothes that had clearly been well kept for years. He held his hat in his hands, as if unsure of the rules of the space. Anna unlocked the door again. He spoke slowly, embarrassed, about a lifetime of working without ever needing to ask for help and how illness had taken the job he loved. He said the hardest part was not hunger, but the feeling of becoming invisible. She did not answer with platitudes about strength. She looked at him directly and said, "You are seen." Then she did the simple administrative tasks. Forms, referrals, food packages, the outward things that accompany inner truth. When he left, he walked differently. Not lighter, straighter. After closing, Layla remained behind stacking chairs. She watched Anna for a moment, and then asked a question that had been forming for weeks. "Does it ever get easier?" Anna considered. "No," she said, "but it gets truer." Layla nodded. Truth cost more than she had imagined. It also gave more back than she had known to expect. There were setbacks, as always. A freezer broke and ruined stored food. A landlord decided not to renew their lease unless rent doubled. A volunteer mishandled funds and disappeared. Each incident pressed against Anna's limits. She allowed herself moments of frustration. Then she returned to action. Phone calls, repairs, replacements, new plans. Her resilience was not personality. It was obedience practiced until it became reflex. Word of the center's work reached churches across the city, not through campaigns, but through people's lives gradually improving. Priests and pastors offered spaces, time, cooperation. Anna accepted partnership freely and kept one boundary clear. The work would never become a stage for competition between denominations. The Christian witness they offer would be unity expressed in service, not argument. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, she locked the building after cleaning the last room and felt something like a closing circle inside her. Years earlier, she had lost nearly everything: work, reputation, structure, and had believed for a time that her story had become small and fixed. Yet here she stood, not restored to former status, but living something richer, because it had passed through loss without losing its core. She did not imagine herself a hero. She did not narrate her life to herself in grand phrases. She simply felt aligned with God, with the people she served, with the woman she knew herself to be before humiliation, and after it too. Outside, evening arrived without drama, as it always does. She walked home slowly, not from fatigue, but from fullness. Tomorrow would bring ordinary demands again. That was why she rested even from thinking of the future. Faith lives best in the next step, not the distant horizon. She reached her door, unlocked it, entered the same small apartment. The crucifix on the wall caught the last light of the day for a moment before shadows settled. Anna whispered a brief prayer of thanks, not for success, not for recognition, but simply for the chance to spend her life this way. No one applauded. No one needed to. What mattered had already taken root, deep, steady, beyond spectacle, beyond palace walls. And it would go on. There comes a point when a story stops expanding outward and begins to settle into the shape it will keep. Not a climax, a clarity. The center had weathered another winter. Shelves were not full, but they were never empty for long. Volunteers came and went. Some stayed. The palace remained where it always had been, a monument of stone and protocol. Yet for Anna it had become simply her workplace, no longer the measure of anything that mattered. The city council announced a public forum on social cohesion. Officials wanted to showcase programs that worked. Invitations went out to institutions with budgets and banners. Someone on a committee added Anna's organization at the last minute because they had heard the simplest testimony. When they say they'll be there, they're there. She did not plan to speak. She disliked stages. But she agreed to attend, sitting in the back while others presented slides and statistics. Words filled the hall. Strategies, frameworks, metrics, many of them sincere, many of them designed more for the audience than for those in need. Near the end, a moderator announced it was time for one more voice from community actors. A hand pointed toward Anna before she could refuse. People turned. She walked to the front slowly, not out of fear, but to make sure she chose each word rather than letting emotion choose for her. She did not use the microphone like a weapon or a badge. She held it as one holds something that amplifies truth but does not create it. She told them almost nothing about herself. She spoke instead about small continuities, of workers reinstated quietly, of students caught before they slipped too far, of elderly people remembering their own names in rooms where someone finally said them with care. She said the city did not need more spectacles of charity. It needed constancy and the refusal to humiliate those who already felt reduced. She said her organization would remain explicitly Christian not as exclusion, but as honesty, because the source of their persistence was not technique, but faith. Then she said one more sentence, not rehearsed, arriving whole. Dignity does not trickle down from palaces. It rises from people who know they are seen by God. There was no applause at first, only quiet, the kind that follows when something lands exactly where it belonged. Then people clapped, not loudly, not long, but enough. She returned to her seat and felt the same peace she felt after mopping a corridor well. The peace of a thing completed. After the forum, Layla waited for her outside. She wore no jewelry that caught the light. She held no audience. She looked like a woman who had stepped out of roles and into her own skin. "I listened," she said simply. "So, did I," Anna answered. They did not revisit the past. They did not need to. It lived between them as something acknowledged and already transformed. Layla spoke then a project she and the prince had begun to support, not as patrons looming above, but as partners willing to learn. She did not ask for Anna's approval. She asked for her counsel. That was the final proof of change. Weeks later, the palace assigned Anna to the Grand Hall again, not for a wedding, for a state ceremony that would bring diplomats and press. Years earlier, this room had been the scene of attempted humiliation. Now it was just a room with floors that needed cleaning. She worked in it as she always did, steady, unseen, not diminished by invisibility, because invisibility no longer defined her. As she finished, one of the younger staff members lingered. He had been hired recently and did not know her full history. He watched how she worked and finally said, almost shyly, "You don't rush, even when they rush us." Anna wrung out the mop and answered without looking up. Things done with care last longer. He nodded, as if he had been given more than practical advice. That evening at the center, a small celebration took place. Not for her. For a group of students who had completed exams they once believed were beyond them. There were plastic cups and a cake, slightly leaning to one side. Laughter filled the room in unpolished bursts. Someone insisted she say a few words. She didn't want to, but she did, because community is made of small willingness. She told them something she had learned across many years and losses. You are not the sum of what was done to you. You are not the sum of what you failed once to do. You are the sum of the choices you make now. After the celebration, when the building gradually emptied and lights were turned off room by room, she remained behind for a moment. The quiet was familiar now, not lonely. She sat, folded her hands, and prayed not for impact or legacy, but for fidelity, the strength to keep showing up tomorrow with the same attention she had today. She understood then that there would be no final triumphant scene in her life. No title bestowed. No dramatic curtain. The ending she had reached was different. She had become someone she did not have to escape from. She belonged to God and to the simple work God had placed in front of her. On her way out, she paused at the door, looked once more at the mismatched chairs, the imperfect walls, the evidence of life lived without polish. She smiled. The desert sky above the city was clear. The palace lights shone in the distance not as threat, not as goal, just as part of the same landscape where children slept, workers rested, and tomorrow waited. She walked home. No ceremony marked the end. That was right, because this was not the end of a story meant to impress. It was a steady continuation of a life that had remembered its source, and would keep, day after day, returning everything back to God.